Hi guys, I'd like to welcome each and every one of us to Honest Sciences and Mathematics TV channel. In our channel, we discuss various topics in mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biology. And today we are going to have a discussion in one of the biology topics on support and movement in humans. And this is going to be the difference between the male and the female pelvic girdle. Now, in this particular discussion, this is going to assist us to differentiate between the morphological makeup of this part of the human support system. And of course, this is going to assist us appreciate, of course, the overall adaptation that is, of course, developed due to the reproductive adaptation in female and, of course, male human support system, respectively. So for today, we're going to, of course, try to look at the various ways in which this specific pelvic girdle is formed. And as we said from our introductory part, basically the pelvic girdle forms what we call the appendicular skeletal part of the human skeletal system. And this is basically a ring of bones, which of course assist in connecting the bones of the lower limbs to the axial skeletal part of the support system. Sorry for that. Now, in this case, of course, I've given a display for the right section of what we refer to as a pelvic girdle. And the full, of course, part of that one consists of the right and left, as we're going to see later in our following illustrations. And of course, this ring of bones, as I've said, is made up of flat and irregular bones, which basically are broadly divided into three categories of the ilium, ischium, and pubis, as we're going to see later. Now, in my next illustration, I'm going to show, of course, this difference and a broader, of course, outlook of this particular section of the pelvic girdle, so that discussion is going to create that contrast between the male and the female insofar as these three sections are concerned. Now, as I've said, this gives us a general illustration for both the male and the female pelvic girdle. Now, this particular section has been expanded to show these various bones, which, of course, are fused together to form that a specific part of bones, of course, which I've said join between the, of course, the part of the skeletal part of the skeletal system, the lower and the axial skeletal support system. So in this case, we have different, of course, labels in this particular part, which we are going to see later being mentioned in one way or another. But of importance for us is to see the broader categories, which of course makes up the three bones which I had mentioned, which is the ilium, pubis, and ischium sections of this particular bone. And there are other sections like the coccyx, which are joining, of course, which is part of the axial skeletal system. So basically, this is the section that we know is known as the sacrum. This is the sacroiliac joint, and then the iliac crest sacropromontory section, which is found at this particular part. This is the iliac spine, the coccyx, and the acetabellum, the symphysis, pubis, pitular, foramen, and the subpubic angle, which we're going to mention basically as we go by. So there are various ways in which we're going to consider this specific foramina that is found in these specific sections, and try to see what is the difference between the male and the female pelvic girdle. Going to show the difference between these various parts of this pelvic girdle. So the above the above sections of the anterior view of the pelvic girdle, of course, has been given for both the male and the female. And of course, we have just given a minimal description for these various labels here, which are going to assist us, of course, try to contrast between the male and the female parts of this pelvic girdle. Now, first, since as I have said, we are going to consider a few sections of this specific male and the female pelvic girdle, which is going to assist us differentiate between the two. Now, of essence for us is to try and look at this lower part of this specific feature that we call the subpubic angle. Now, for the case of male, we are going to see that if we try to consider this one in terms of angular extension, then therefore we're going to see that for the male, this extension basically is less compared to this one for the female, and therefore we are going to mark that one as one of the difference in features, of course, whereby we're going to see that in males the subpubic angle is less than 90 degrees, whereas in female this is pronounced and more than 90 degrees therefore, respectively. And we're going to see that there's a difference also between what we refer to as the pelvic inlet. And this pelvic inlet has been named for the pelvic inlet, which is red dashed, of course, consisting of these specific sections for the sacropromontory, the pelvic prim, and the symphysis pubis, which basically, as we can see, this prim has been labeled in red in this specific part. Now, if you try to look at the male and the female ones, then therefore, from our geometry, you can be able to see the difference, that the male one is, of course, having a specific shape, which is, as we can roughly say, a heart-shaped, whereas the female one is going to be displayed as an oval one. So therefore, there is a difference in this particular allowance that we call the pelvic prim, which is a difference, or rather this particular section, which is a difference between the male and the female ones. And that one, apart from this pubic angle, creates a second contrast between the male and the female pelvic girdle. And therefore, we're going also to see that the ischial spine, which is, can consider this one, the ischial spine, there's some attachments that we're going to look at this specific part, which are known as, there are this protrudency that we are, of course, we can be able to appreciate when we are trying to look at a detailed part of these specific pelvic girdles. But we're going to see that the difference between these specific parts that, of course, we're going to refer to as the ischial spines, we're going to see that in females, they are further apart as compared to the male ones. So therefore, that is going to be elaborate when I'm going to give our last illustration for perhaps the detailed description of this pelvic girdle. And therefore, there's a second part of the bone that are shown for the ilium. And I'm going to, of course, use another illustration which I had shown. Now, in this particular illustration, of course, it's not elaborate, but I wanted us to look at the section of this particular bone that we refer to as the ilium. Now, there's a difference between the male pelvic girdle and the female ones insofar as the ilium is concerned, whereby we're going to see that in females, this particular section is going to be more shallow and flared as compared to the male one. And therefore, that one creates another contrast between the male and the female, of course, pelvic girdle, apart from the two that we have already mentioned. So we're going to look at another difference. Of course, there's this encirclement that we have shown in red, which basically represent the pelvic inlet, whereas this one that is encircled in blue, of course, it's going to represent what we call the pelvic inlet. There's also a difference between these two particular parts, as we have said. We have said that the red one, of course, is going to be considered what we call the pelvic inlet, which we said that it's heart-shaped in males and oval in female. Now, for the pelvic outlet, which is, of course, a blue, encircled in blue, as we have mentioned, it's going to be broader and more shallow in females as compared to the one that is going to be displayed, of course, in males. And there's also a difference in this particular part, whereby we are going to see that, of course, in females, this particular part, as you can compare insofar as the mass is concerned, this is going to be lighter in females as compared to the one that is going to be found in males. And of course, we're going to see the aspect of a funnel shape if we try to look at other orientations for these two particular, of course, parts of the pelvic girdle for male and female, whereby we're going to see that there's a concept of a funnel shape if we try to have another orientation. Of course, I'm going to use that one in a different illustration to create the contrast between the two for the anterior and the inferior parts respectively, which is going to assist us know of that difference. So there's also a projection of what we call the sacropromontory for this particular male and the female. If you can be able to see from this specific part, assuming that the orientation is the same, and therefore we're going to see that the sacropromontory does not project as far as anteriorly in female as it projects for male, and that one also creates the difference between those two specific parts of the male and the female pelvic girdle. So of course, this is going to assist us in overly appreciate the concept of adaptation in reproduction for the female part of the pelvic girdle, which is of course going to of course be shown different ways when we are trying to consider the whole aspect of the support and movement system in humans. So catch us in our other videos where we're going to look at the various parts and their various adaptations, and of course which is going to assist us in trying to compare with the videos that we've discussed on either aspect of functionalities or different features which are appearing on these various bones that we're looking into. So that is it for now, guys. Bye. Catch us in our next video. Thanks.